The summer of 1886 came hard over the Bitterroot country. By June, the creeks had drawn back from their banks, leaving pale rings of mud beneath the cottonwoods. Grasshoppers clicked in the brittle fields. The wind moved all day, but carried no coolness with it. It came down from the hills smelling of pine dust and stone, crossed the open range and pressed against the Mercer ranch until the buildings seemed to lean away. Elias Mercer rose before daylight and worked until he could no longer see his hands. He watered the horses from a well that groaned with every turn of the windlass. He checked fences, salted cattle, patched the lean-to, hauled hay, and ate whatever could be warmed in one blackened pan. He spoke to the animals when speaking was necessary. Easy. Back now. Hold still. The house received no such kindness. It stood square and weathered beneath 2 dead poplars, with 4 rooms, a deep porch, and curtains that had not been opened in years. Dust lay along the mantel. A cracked cup remained beside the stove, because Elias had grown used to seeing it there. In the back room, a narrow cradle faced the wall beneath a sheet. He never entered that room. People in Red Bluff had stopped asking him to supper. The first year, they brought pies and awkward words. The second, they sent invitations through neighbors. By the 5th, they learned Elias Mercer preferred buying flour, salt, and lamp oil without conversation. He was 38 that summer and looked older in certain light. The sun had carved lines beside his eyes. His shoulders had thickened from years of lifting what no one else was there to lift. He wore silence like another man might wear a black coat. It was the roof that forced a change. A brief storm tore shingles loose above the kitchen and sent rain down the wall. Elias stood with 2 buckets while muddy drops struck the floor around his boots. The next morning, at the general store, Mrs. Bell watched him load tar paper and nails. "You need someone in that house," she said. "I need a dry roof. You need both." Near the door hung a notice in her round handwriting. "Housekeeper wanted. Room, board, and fair wages. Mercer Ranch, 7 miles north." Elias pulled it down. Mrs. Bell took another from beneath the counter. "I have 6 more." 3 weeks passed. No one came. Then, on a hot July afternoon, Elias saw a woman walking along the north road. She wore a plain gray dress and carried no bag. Her bonnet hung down her back. Dark hair had worked loose at her temples. One shoe was split and wrapped with cloth. When Elias rode near, she stopped and held her right hand closed at her waist. "You lost?" he asked. "No. This road ends at my place." "I know." She opened her hand. A small sewing needle lay across her palm. "I came about the work," she said. Elias looked behind her. The road was empty to the shimmer of town. "Where are your things?" She closed her fingers around the needle. "These are my things." Her name was Mara Kessler. Her speech carried the light shape of another country. She had walked all 7 miles from Red Bluff. Elias handed her his canteen. She drank carefully, then returned it before she was satisfied. "You can ride," he said. "I will walk beside you." So they went with the horse between them, Elias holding the reins and Mara touching the saddle horn when the road climbed. At the ranch, he showed her the small room off the kitchen. It held a bedstead, a washstand, and a chest with one broken hinge. "The door locks from inside," he said. Mara tested the latch. "The wages? $4 a week. Paid Saturday. Work? Meals, washing, house, chickens. I can tolerate chickens. Anything you don't agree to, you say so." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then I agree." That evening, Mara made soup from potatoes, beans, half an onion, and salt pork. Elias ate at one end of the table while she sat at the other. The spoon in her hand trembled once, then steadied. Before dawn, he found her sewing cloth around her broken shoe. The needle moved in and out, small and bright between her fingers. "You'll ruin the dress," he said. The dress still reaches my ankles. There are old boots in the shed. Whose? My wife's. Mara lowered the needle. I will manage. They're no use in a box. He brought them after breakfast. Brown leather, little worn, with dust pale along the seams. Mara accepted them with both hands. She cleaned them, softened the leather with tallow, and wore them the next morning with folded cloth filling the toes. Mara worked as if trying to repay a debt larger than her wages. She scrubbed the kitchen ceiling, opened windows that resisted opening, boiled linens, and carried the cracked cup from the stove to the wash basin. Elias found it there. I thought it was broken, she said. It is. Do you want it back? He studied the old crack, brown with coffee. No. She wrapped the cup in newspaper and placed it in the cupboard instead of throwing it away. That was the first thing she learned about him. Broken did not mean useless. It meant not yet ready to be moved. The first thing he learned about her was that she saved thread. She wound every leftover length around cardboard. She washed flour sacks and cut away the printed ink. She mended his shirts with stitches so small they nearly disappeared. She patched the kitchen curtain and hung it open. Sunlight entered the room in a wide, clean band. Elias stood in it by accident when he came for water. Too much? Mara asked. No. After that, the curtain stayed open. The days gathered into a rhythm. At dawn, Elias split wood, and Mara lit the stove. Coffee appeared near his place, black and unsweetened, though he had never told her how he drank it. At noon, she carried food to the fence line. At first, she left it on a post. Later, she sat in the shade while he ate. Once, she looked toward the pale mountains. Does the snow always look so close? It looks close until you ride toward it. She nodded as if this confirmed something about the world. He repaired the hinge on her empty chest. 2 days later, his winter coat appeared on the back of his chair. The torn lining had been re-sewn. A missing button had been replaced by a smooth disc cut from bone. Where did you get this? From the soup bone. You made it? Yes. He put on the coat, though the day was warm. The button held. In August, a mare cut her shoulder on wire. Elias cleaned the wound while Mara held the lantern. The horse trembled. Talk to her, Elias said. Mara began in a language he did not know. Her voice stayed low and even. The mare's breathing slowed. What did you tell her? That the night is not forever. Horse, understand that? She understood the voice. He nearly smiled, then turned away before she could see. On Saturdays, Elias placed 4 silver dollars beside Mara's plate. She wrapped them in cloth and hid them beneath her mattress. The first week, he pretended not to notice. The second, he said, "Bank in town keeps money. So do mattresses. Banks don't catch fire. Banks have men." He did not ask what that meant. Near the end of August, he returned from town with a plain wooden sewing box. Inside lay 3 spools of thread, a paper of needles, and a silver thimble. Mara touched the thimble without lifting it. "I have a needle. Needles break." Her face tightened. Then she sat down. "My mother gave me this one before I left home. She said a woman who can mend cloth can usually find one more day." Was she right? So far, she placed the old needle in the center compartment and used the new ones for work. September brought cool nights. Elias cut hay in the lower meadow, and Mara gathered beside him after the house was done. "You're not paid for field labor," he said. "I am paid to help the ranch. You keep the house. The house eats from the field." There was no answer to that. At night, her palms blistered. Elias left a tin of salve outside her door. In the morning, it sat beside his coffee, wiped clean. Small things began to pass between them without words. A warm biscuit appeared in his coat pocket before a long ride. He split kindling thin enough for her to light. She kept a basin ready when he came in covered with dust. He moved a pantry hook lower because she always stretched to reach it. She began placing 2 cups on the porch at sunset. Sometimes they drank coffee, sometimes only water. The sky burned copper over the range, then faded above the hills. Coyotes called from the creek bed. The silence between them changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers protecting themselves. It became a place they both knew how to sit. One evening, Mara brought a bundle of cloth to the porch. Squares of faded blue, brown wool, red calico, and white flower sacking lay across her lap. "A quilt," she said. "Looks like pieces. That is what a quilt is before it decides what to become." Some cloth came from his worn shirts, some from old curtains. At the center lay a square of yellow that had once been part of a child's dress. Elias recognized it. His hand stopped around his cup. "I found it in the back room," Mara said. "I should have asked." He stood so quickly the chair scraped the boards. "That room stays closed." He went inside. The back room door stood open. Dust had been wiped from the floor. The sheet remained over the cradle, but the window had been raised. Fresh air moved the cloth. Elias shut the window and sat in the hallway with his back against the wall. He had not sat there since the winter Ruth died. Fever took his wife in 3 days. Their daughter lived less than 1. The doctor came late because snow blocked the south road. Afterward, Elias carried the cradle into the back room and turned it toward the wall. He believed grief would shrink if he gave it no light. Instead, it filled every dark place in the house. Mara did not knock. She remained on the porch until the stars came out. The next morning, the yellow square was folded on the mantel beside the cracked cup. For 3 days, they spoke only when work required it. On the 4th, Elias carried the cradle to the barn. He repaired one runner, tightened the joints, and sanded the wood until dusk. When he returned, sawdust clung to his sleeves. "You can use the yellow," he said. "I do not need it." "I know." She waited. "Use it anyway." The yellow square became the center of the quilt. In October, letters began arriving for Mara in a child's careful hand. She read them alone. Afterward, she worked faster. She took in mending from town. Shirts, dresses, trousers, curtains, even a canvas wagon cover. Her lamp burned long after Elias went to bed. Through the wall, he heard the small pull of thread through cloth. One Saturday, he placed $6 beside her plate instead of 4. She pushed 2 back. "Harvest wages." "I did not work enough for 6. You worked more. I will take what we agreed." He looked at the shadows beneath her eyes. "Who sends the letters?" Her hand stopped. "My brother and sister." "Where?" "St. Louis." "With family?" "With a woman who knew my mother. She is ill." "How old?" "Jonas is 9. Lida is 6. He looked at the coins between them. "You are saving to bring them here." "Yes." "To this ranch?" "To Montana." "Not your house." "Where, then?" "I will find work in town." 3 people in 1 room? We have lived in less. A cold feeling settled beneath his ribs. "When were you planning to leave?" "When I had enough." "You took this job to save passage. I took it because I needed work. And then you go." That was always the agreement. It was true. $4 a week. Room and board. No promise beyond work. Still, he pictured the curtain closing again. 1 cup on the porch. The house returning to its old breathing. "You should have said, 'You did not ask why I came. You said you had nothing. I had them.'" The words stopped him. Mara's fingers closed around the coins. "I had them even when they were far away." Elias left before he said something cruel. For the next week, he worked beyond darkness. He rode fence that did not need riding and checked cattle twice. At night, he heard Mara's needle and knew each stitch carried her closer to leaving. Then the first frost silvered the yard. A telegram arrived from St. Louis. Mara opened it beside the porch steps. Elias watched the color leave her face. Mrs. Novak, Dead Stop Children sent west, with Aid Society, Stop Arrive Red Bluff. October 28, Stop Guardian must claim. Stop what Aid Society? Elias asked. I do not know. I sent money for train tickets, not this. Mrs. Bell's son, who had delivered the message, shifted in his saddle. There's a man at the hotel, he said. Mr. Vale says he places children with suitable homes. Mara folded the telegram. They are not to be placed. We'll ride in tomorrow, Elias said. I can manage. I know. Then why? Because the road is long. Mr. Amos Vale received them in the hotel dining room. He was a narrow man with a polished collar and a case filled with forms. He examined Mara's letters and asked where she lived, what she earned, whether she owned property, and whether she had a husband. No, Mara said. Then who is Mr. Mercer? My employer. Vale turned to Elias. Are you willing to assume financial responsibility for these children? They have a sister. That is not the question. It should be. Vale folded his hands. The society cannot release two minors to a single woman living as an employee in an unrelated man's home. There are standards. I have money, Mara said. How much? $48. For 3 people through a Montana winter, I can work. I do not doubt it. But effort and stability are not the same. What happens if you don't release them? Elias asked. They will be placed with approved households. Together? Vale hesitated. When possible. Mara touched the collar where her mother's needle was pinned. They stay together. Vale's expression softened, which made Elias dislike him more. The train arrives tomorrow evening. I will inspect your circumstances before deciding. You can inspect my ranch, Elias said. Mara turned toward him. Vale took out a form. Are you offering permanent residence? The question reached across the table and exposed what they had refused to name. Mara stood. No, I will not have him say yes because you cornered him. She walked out. Elias caught her beside the hitching rail. There isn't another way before tomorrow. There is always another way, not one that keeps them together. You think I do not know that? He lowered his voice. Let him inspect the ranch. And what will he see? A house. Your house. For how long? He had no answer ready. Mara nodded once. That is why I said no. She rode back alone. That afternoon, Elias entered the back room. Ruth's shawl hung from a peg. A wooden horse lay on the sill, one wheel missing. Pale marks from the cradle showed on the floor. For years, he had called the room proof of love. Leaving it untouched meant he had not abandoned those he lost. Now it looked like a locked place no living person was allowed to enter. He opened the window fully. He carried out the boxes and brought the cradle back from the barn. He set it beneath the window, facing the light. Mara returned after dark and found him repairing the wooden horse at the kitchen table. The children are too old for that, she said. Maybe. Vale can inspect tomorrow. I told him, no. I'm telling you yes. Her face closed. For how long? He set down the knife. As long as they need. That is not the same as wanting them. No. She flinched. He continued. It's not the same. I want them here. Mara did not move. I don't know Jonas. I don't know Lida. I hardly know what children eat besides everything. But this house has been empty long enough. Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. And when winter ends, they stay if they want. And me. He looked at the needle pinned inside her collar. You stay if you want. The words were plain. They were not enough for all that stood between them, but they were true. Mara sat across from him. I was going to leave without telling you until the last week, she said. I know. I thought if I told you sooner, you might send me away. I made you believe there was nothing here to stay for. I did not come looking for anything to stay for. Neither did I. She picked up the wooden horse and turned its new wheel. It sticks, she said. I can fix that. The train arrived beneath a sky, heavy with snow. Wind drove pale grains across the tracks. Townspeople gathered under the station awning as the engine came in steaming and black. Mr. Vale climbed down first. Then came 6 children in borrowed coats, each with a tag tied to a button. A thin boy of 9 stepped onto the platform, holding the hand of a smaller girl in a red cap. Mara made a sound Elias had never heard. Jonas. The boy looked up. Then Lida broke free and ran. Mara dropped to her knees. The child struck her hard enough to push her backward. Jonas came more slowly, trying to remain serious until Mara reached for him too. Then his face folded against her shoulder. Vale cleared his throat after a time. I inspected the property. The house is sound. Stores are adequate. Mrs. Bell and Reverend Shaw spoke on your behalf. Didn't ask them, Elias said. They appeared eager. Vale opened his case. There remains the question of legal responsibility. Elias took the pen. Mara rose, still holding Lida. You do not have to. He signed. Yes, he said. I do. They loaded the children into the wagon with blankets around their shoulders. Jonas sat beside Elias, suspicious of the horses, the land, and the quiet man holding the reins. Lida curled against Mara and fell asleep before they left town. The road north vanished beneath snow. Halfway home, one wheel slid into a frozen rut. The wagon lurched. We're stuck, Jonas said. No. Elias wedged a branch beneath the wheel and guided the team forward. The wheel climbed free. Jonas watched him return. You knew how? I've been stuck before. Will we get stuck again? Probably. What then? We get out again. The boy nodded. They reached the ranch near midnight. Warm light shone from the kitchen window. The house looked different from the road. Not larger exactly. More awake. Inside, Lida stared at the bread on the table as if it were a feast. Jonas inspected every door. Mara removed their wet coats and spoke to them in Czech so quickly Elias could not follow. Lida noticed the sewing box. Is that yours? Mara answered in English. Ours. After they ate, she took Lida to the back room. The child stopped at the cradle. For a baby? It was, Elias said from the doorway. Whose? The old answer rose in him. My daughter's. The child who died. The life that ended. He chose a different truth. It belongs to the house. Jonas slept in the room off the kitchen. Mara and Lida shared the back room. Elias lay awake listening to floorboards creak, whispers behind walls, one child coughing and another turning in bed. The house was no longer quiet. He had thought noise would feel like invasion. Instead, it felt like weather breaking after drought. Winter settled early. Snow covered the fence posts and softened the barn roof. Cattle gathered in the lower pasture, their backs white in the morning. Elias worked from dark to dark, keeping water open and hay before them. Jonas followed whenever allowed. The boy asked why horses slept standing, why smoke fell some mornings and rose on others, and how Elias knew snow was coming by the sound of the well chain. Elias answered what he could. When he did not know, he said so. Jonas trusted him more for that. Lida followed Mara with scraps in a basket. She learned to thread a needle and made stitches that wandered like ant tracks. Mara never pulled them out. She showed her how to turn the cloth and continue. At night, they sat near the stove. Mara worked on the quilt. Jonas carved a boat from pine. Lida dressed the wooden horse in strips of cloth. Elias repaired harness or read old newspapers aloud when the wind was too loud for silence. The first time Lida climbed into his lap, she did not ask. She was sleepy and cold. She leaned against his chest as if the place had been waiting for her. Elias went still. Mara looked up from her sewing. He expected grief to strike like an axe. It came gently, a deep ache warm at the edges. He pulled the blanket around Lida's feet. She slept before the next page. Near Christmas, a blizzard closed the road. Snow pressed against the windows. Elias and Jonas stretched a rope from the porch to the stable. Mara baked bread until the kitchen smelled of yeast and heat. Lida hung red threads from pine branches along the mantel. On the third evening, Jonas and Lida slept beneath the nearly finished quilt. The yellow square lay at its center, surrounded by blue, brown, red, and white. Cloth from a dead child's dress. Cloth from Elias's shirts. Cloth from Mara's flour sack aprons. A piece from Jonas's train coat. A strip from Lida's red cap. Nothing matched. Everything belonged. Mara sat beside Elias near the stove. "When the snow clears, I can find a place in town," she said. "I can sew for money." The old fear moved in him, but it no longer wore anger. "Do you want to go?" She looked at the children. "No. Then don't. It is not proper to remain forever as your housekeeper." "Then don't remain as my housekeeper." Her hands stilled. "I can't promise an easy life," Elias said. "The roof leaks. Cattle get sick. Winters take what they can. I know what winters do. I can promise the children stay together. And me? You too. That sounds like another work arrangement." He looked down at his rough hands. "No, it's not work I'm asking." The wind struck the house and passed over. Mara removed her mother's needle from her collar and held it between them. "I arrived with this," she said. "I thought it was enough because it had to be." Elias closed her fingers around it. "You arrived with more." "What?" He looked at Jonas and Lida beneath the quilt. "The part of them you carried." Her eyes shone. "And now? Now you don't carry them alone." Mara rested her forehead against his. It was a small touch, only breath and warmth. After a moment, he kissed her once. From beneath the quilt, Lida spoke. "Are we staying?" Mara laughed through her tears. Elias looked at the child. "Yes. All winter? All the winters you want." Jonas opened one eye. "What about summer?" "That too." "Good." By morning the storm had passed. The world lay white beneath a blue sky. Smoke rose straight from the chimney. Elias and Jonas cleared the path while Mara opened the kitchen curtain. Lida stood on a chair with both hands against the glass. Later, they carried the finished quilt into the back room. Mara spread it across the bed. The yellow square caught the winter light. Elias moved the cradle to the wall, not turned away, only set aside until it might be needed. Jonas placed the wooden horse on the sill. Lida tucked her red cap inside the cradle for safekeeping. Mara took her old needle from her collar. She placed it in the sewing box and closed the brass clasp. Then she set the box on the mantel beside the cracked cup. At supper, 4 bowls stood on the table. Lida swung her feet beneath the bench. Jonas spoke with his mouth full and was corrected by Mara. He swallowed and asked for another biscuit. Elias passed the plate. Milk spilled. Lida gasped. Elias caught the stream with his sleeve before it reached the edge. The child laughed, and after a moment, he did too. Mara looked across the table at him. No grand words were needed. Outside, winter held the range in its hard white grip. The road was buried. The creeks were frozen. Wind moved over the roof and searched for every opening. It found none. Elias reached beneath the table. Mara's hand met his there. He held it while the children argued over the last biscuit, and the fire settled low and warm in the stove. For years, Elias had believed a family was something the land had taken from him. By winter, he understood it could also be something that arrived on foot through the dust, carrying no luggage, holding one bright needle in a closed hand, and asking only for honest work. What entered his house that summer had not come to replace what was lost. It had come to live. This time, when the wind pressed against the walls held.